Magnetize your minis, flight stands, custom kits, and all the hobby supplies you'll need from themagnetbaron.com.
Hello and welcome to the YouTube channel for Craft World, Aeldari.com. I'm Brent, and this is part 7 of my comprehensive 10th edition Aeldari review, in which I talk about Ghosts of the Webway, the Harlequin detachment. And I have some good news for those of us who are sitting on huge Harlequin collections from 8th edition and 9th edition, when clowns were their own sub-faction, and at times they were really, really good, and at other times they were just fun to play and potentially good. And since then, they've kind of been in the corner. You could run mono Harlequins, technically, with the index, but they didn't work very well, and they didn't feel particularly Harlequin-y. And now two things have changed. One, they can be very, very good, and they feel very Harlequin-y. Ghosts of the Webway reintroduces a traditional Harlequin playstyle whereby, although you only have 6 tools available to you, there's a very limited number of character sheets here, the troops, the infantry, are versatile enough, and the stratagems and enhancements are tricky enough that it makes it possible with this relatively limited tool set to play into a wide variety of different types of opponents. You have target elimination options for everything from Imperial Knights to Tyranid Hordes, and they have clever ways to play secondaries and primaries. And that's cool. It's really exciting. It's really fun. It's really neat to see clowns doing the clown thing again. I think that these rules are incredibly well designed. And while I am a little bit skeptical about seeing a lot of Ghosts of the Webway GT first placers, I think that they're absolutely good enough to take to grand tournaments. I think they're good. I think they're competitive. I think we're going to see some of these detachments doing very, very well. But I also think that despite only having 8 data sheets to keep track of, this is by far the most challenging detachment in the entire book to play, bar none. I think the hardest Craft Worlds one is probably Seer Council, and I think that the Harlequin one is like an order of magnitude almost more challenging than that one, because it requires you to not only keep track of a bunch of very complicated rules interactions to get the most out of them, but to play an absolutely masterful precision positioning game in which you know exactly how far your opponent's units can move, what their movement tricks are. You know how far all of your stuff goes with the various bonuses, and then you can think about the weird stuff that happens when you trigger certain enhancements and stratagems so that like a unit moves, a character dies, it resurrects, and then it makes a charge move on your opponent's turn, and then it could potentially use battle focus ability. Like, it gets crazy. And that is a lot to ask of a new player. Also, because they're so fragile. The way Harlequins work, and the way I think that they've worked traditionally, is that when it's going well for you, it's this beautiful choreography of war in which they don't have a single really hard-hitting unit. What you have is a bunch of units, each of which is relatively cheap and somewhat disposable, all of which can put pretty decent damage on anything. So you're killing even moderately big stuff, death by 1,000 cuts, like clowns jumping out of the webway, throwing a grenade at a thing and shooting it with a fusion pistol, and it gets hit by some haywire cannons from some bikes at a weird angle that starts short-circuiting the tank, and then suddenly the clowns are on top of it, taking it apart with these melee weapons that are not anti-tank, but they all have devastating wounds and tons of attacks, and the tank dies. And that's what it's like all over the field. Like, you're going to be killing enemy units with attacks from like 3 or 4 of your units, which are then jumping back in transports and using weird shenanigans. It's wild, and it's also hard. So while I don't want to discourage new players who are excited about Harlequins from collecting clowns, they're super cool, also in the fluff, unless you absolutely know that this is what you want to be, is like a mono Harlequin player, and that's going to be your first 40k army, you might start by splashing some clowns into one of the other detachments. And although all Aeldari are fragile, clowns really do just disappear in a fine red mist when anything goes wrong. As soon as you make one little mistake and one of your players trips, what was going to be this symphony of destruction becomes a cacophony of cataclysm when like the one Harlequin trips over the orc's foot and 12 of your players just get obliterated into pulpy elf porridge in seconds. because that 4-up invuln is nice and everything, but these are T3 models with 1 wound and they die to a stiff breeze, especially volume of attacks. Okay, let's dive in here. The detachment ability is actually spectacularly unsexy. All it does is make Harlequins playable as a mono army by removing some serious obstacles. For one thing, the troops all become battle line, which is necessary because with only 60 data sheets, you need to be able to take a lot of the troops. They're the only infantry. It also makes the troops OC2, which is absolutely essential so that you don't have to kill an enemy to strip an objective, right? The ability to like run on with some players and do some damage and then out OC the opponent, that's really important. Without that, it would be really difficult to run Harlequins as a monofaction. It's also not something that you're going to like lose sleep being excited about, but it was important. If you run a regular non-Ghosts of the Webway Aeldari army, you can only take 1 up of the characters, but in a Ghosts of the Webway detachment, you can have 3 Troop Masters, 3 Death Jesters, 3 Shadow Seers. You can only have 1 Solitaire because it's an epic hero, and it would not make any sense narratively to have more. And I think you want one. Oh, it's worth noting, just to be clear, I keep talking about having only 8 sheets to choose from. That's if you're choosing to run this as mono Harlequins. You don't have to. You can certainly splash in other Aeldari in the list building phase. And from a competitive perspective, I think there's definitely a good argument for doing that, even though they don't benefit from any of the strats or anything. There are plenty of units in the Codex that don't need any support to function really well. And at the end, when I talk about list building, I'll talk about a couple of units that I think work really well if you do want to splash some things in. But also I think a lot of people are going to want to run this as mono Harlequins. And this is also, I think, one sort of curious place in which even a lot of hardcore competitive players who don't normally make any narrative concessions will sometimes be like, no, for my clown detachment, it's going to be all clowns, even if there's something cool that I could do. So you don't have to correct me in the comments and tell me that other units are illegal too. I know they are. But I'm going to treat this as a mono clown detachment for the most part in this video because I think that's how most people are going to want to run it. And the last thing, the actual detachment ability that isn't just like changes to army construction. Harlequin models can jump over enemy models in the charge phase. Their flip belts already let them do flippy movement in the movement phase, but jumping over enemy models in the charge phase means that it becomes very hard to screen against Harlequins, which again, it's not going to come up a ton. It's not super sexy. I think it is necessary. Otherwise, there would be a smart player who just figured out like, oh, there's this one trick you use when you play into Harlequins. Probably it would really shut down their competitive reach. So it's like a boring, necessary thing. It is cool. It's neat that it works on the bikes because the melee weapons for the bikes got better, but it's not like super exciting. The real juice is in the stratagems and to some degree the enhancements. But the stratagems in particular really change what is possible for Harlequins. Let's start with the data sheets though, because there are not that many of them and everything's referring back to those. We'll do the troop first because obviously we do the troop first. They're the heart of any Harlequin army. Harlequin troops have the same stat line they did before, and they come in the same numbers they did before. So you can take a unit of 5 for 75 points, 6 for 90, 11 for 165, or 12 for 180. They still move 8, T3, 6 up save, but 4 up invuln, so cover never matters. 1 wound, leadership 6 plus, OC 1, but 2 if you're running Ghosts of the Webway, and we're assuming you are for the purposes of this video. However, their weapons are better. They're better. Spoiler alert, there's no way to advance and charge. I know. Sad. But the 8-inch move in combination with battle focus, because the Harlequin stuff all battle focuses, means that it's kind of a 10-inch move, actually, and they can shut down Overwatch, so they can't just be hosed with torrent weapons using Flitting Shadows, the battle focus ability. So Harlequins are just better by virtue of having battle focus. Their loadout options have remained the same, but the rules have changed a bit. The smaller squads, the 5s and 6s, are still limited to, they can take up to 2 fusion pistols in place of shuriken pistols and up to 2 Neuro Disruptors. The Neuro Disruptor got better, which is great. The Fusion Pistol is still, it's one attack, hitting on 3s, strength 8, -4 AP, D6 damage, Melta 2. So if you're really close to something, you're doing D6 plus 2, which is great. It's a little bit like running around with a Bright Lance in your pocket, just without quite as much strength. And it's assault. So obviously if you advance, you can't charge, but if you needed to get in there, right? The Neuro Disruptor is also assault, and it's got anti-infantry 2 up. It's one attack. It hits on 3s, strength 4, -2 AP. Thank goodness. And it does 1 damage. It is now just straight up better than the Sharkin Pistol, where there was like some room for argument kind of before. It is a little bit of a bummer for those of us who have a lot of Harlequins built with Sharkin Pistols for back when war gear cost. But now there's really never going to be a reason to have more than 1 Sharkin Pistol in the small squad. The larger squads can have up to 4 Fusion Pistols and 4 Neuro Disruptors, which obviously you're going to want to take in the big squads. The melee weapons have also changed a bit, and they're just better than they were. You can give the regular players either Harlequin special weapons. So all those special weapons that used to have different special rules are now one thing again. Those are 4 attacks, hitting on 3s, strength 4, -1 AP, 1 damage, or Harlequin Blades, which are 5 attacks, but only 3 strength, and they both, but still -1 AP and 1 damage. So it's the same profile, but you choose either an extra attack with 3 strength or 4 attacks at 4 strength. The sheer volume of attacks with devastating wounds is really good. It means that regular Harlequins have some play into very hard targets, especially because they also have those fusion pistols. So even a small squad can move up near a hard target, blast it with a couple of fusion pistols after throwing a grenade at it because they have the grenade keyword, and then get into melee. And if they're putting out more than 20 attacks, some of which have devastating wounds, they're going to put a few more wounds on it. And if there's a Troop Master in there, that's another couple of really good weapons. A pretty cheap Harlequin unit with the right CP expenditure not only is good at killing infantry, they've always been good at killing infantry, but also can threaten hard targets. Again, especially if led by a character. In terms of you can give the lead player a Aeldari power sword, which in this version also has devastating wounds. So this one's just better. It's 5 attacks, hitting on 3s, strength 4, -2 AP, 1 damage with devastating wounds. So the sergeant gets a better weapon, which is great. And they still have their flip belts, which essentially lets them do something even better than flying. They just move directly over vertical stuff. They can leap onto roofs and stuff, which is amazing. And they have an additional rule that makes them especially awesome in melee. And again, gives them great target diversity. At the start of your fight phase, you do a Dance of Death, and you choose one of the following. Reroll hit rolls of 1, add 1 to the wound roll, or you give the enemy unit -1 to hit. This is really good. I especially like add 1 to the wound roll and to hard targets. And it really makes that Harlequin Blade hardcore worth considering. Harlequin Blades will be objectively better into stuff that's more than T8 or better, because either Harlequin melee weapon would wound on 5 up, but of course you get more attacks with the blade. Although if what you're really looking for is the dev wounds, triggering more hits makes sense, because then you're rolling more dice for dev wounds. But I do really like that regardless of what your Harlequin players are built with, there isn't like a melee loadout that just sucks. The regular Harlequin weapon will be better into a lot of infantry, or in some cases equal. In terms of squad size, 5 is points efficient, and if you want to stick it in a transport with a character with a Troop Master, you're definitely going to want 3 Troop Masters. It does the thing. But if you run the really big squads, you get a pretty powerful, 180 points is a lot, but 50 or 60 melee attacks with devastating wounds on top of 4 fusion shots and possibly a grenade and possibly this stratagem, that's going to kill a lot of stuff. But it is the small squads are especially useful because the transport, which we'll talk about next, still has that rule where it makes it easy to jump back inside, right? And you can only fit 6 Harlequins in a transport, and they just jump in for free at the end of the fight phase, which definitely provides some longevity. I think you are going to want a couple of big squads, in part just to be midfield counterpunchers, maybe. But most of the play here is probably around smaller units with characters leading them. Or if you want to find out exactly how good your Harlequins are into various targets with various squad sizes, depending on whether or not you choose to reroll the hit roll or the wound roll or outfit them with blades or Harlequin special weapons, you can do so using the Adept Roll app, phone app, which I've talked about before. It's a pocket 40K super calculator that will immediately tell you the damage output of various loadouts, depending on how they interact. Those loadouts interact with various special rules, so you can decide, like, do I have devastating wounds? Don't I? Am I rerolling ones? Have I added +1 to the wound roll? What am I doing here? And you will get the exact math for all of the different ways that you could outfit and build your Harlequins, instead of relying on my muddy inferences. Also, you can get similar statistics for survivability on your units, depending on what you give them for loadouts. The app's free, but if you pay $5 a year, it's better. But that's like 40 cents a month. I will link it in the video description. It's a great tool. Oh, one last thing about the troops before we talk transports. That -1 to hit ability, that's the one you trigger when your opponent fights first. Harlequins will just die in melee combat against pretty much everything. Even stuff that's not particularly good at melee, like a unit of Imperial Guardsmen, if they fix bayonets and charge the Harlequins, will definitely kill some of them. Space Marines, even with no AP, again, because it's always a 4-up invuln, so AP doesn't really matter. Like just a regular bog standard 5 Space Marine, like basic Primaris squad, if they charge some Harlequins in melee, with average dice could kill like 3 or 4 of them. So being -1 to hit is actually kind of a big deal. If you charge, I think you always choose one of the others, and if you get charged or you're not fighting first, maybe you take the -1, because each of those Harlequins represents so many additional attacks that even if you only save 1 or 2 models, you are also getting the advantage of extra damage, because then those clowns fight. Okay, transports. Let's talk transports. I actually already told you the single most important thing about the Star Weaver, the small Harlequin transport, and that is that units can jump back in if they're within 6 inches of it, wholly within 6 inches, at the end of the fight phase. It's really good. It increases the survivability and maneuverability of your troops. These things are pretty cheap at 80 points, and with a 14-inch move, and then of course they've got the vehicle keywords, so they could theoretically increase that by D6 + 1 with battle focus, or if you're moving multiple Star Weavers, one will go D6 + 1, and then you could use the +2-inch movement on the others. That is a tremendous threat range on the table. If you wanted to make use of the firing deck with the fusion pistols, they have a firing deck, and if you also have a troop master on there who has a pistol, you could have some pretty decent anti-tank fire with one of these at close range without exposing your fragile clowns. Although if you really needed to get within melta range, you could move the D6 + 1 inches extra on a normal move with battle focus, jump out 3 inches with your clowns to get melta range, blow the thing away, and then jump back in at the end of your own fight phase, which is pretty good. And then when something tries to shoot the transport, you could use fade away potentially. But the data card otherwise is, I think, unchanged. So it's got that 14-inch move. It's T6 with a 4-up save and a 4-up invuln. The 4-up save matters because it can have cover. It's got 6 wounds, so one nice solid hit from a las cannon. If they roll a 6, blows it away. Depending on the las cannon, sometimes they don't even need a 6. It's OC2, which is cool. It's got the shuriken cannon. If you have several of these things, having some shuriken cannons in your list gives you some long-range anti-infantry fire that can, with the lethal hits, multi-class into putting a few extra wounds on a hard target. Its melee weapons are nothing to speak of. It's worse than a single Harlequin. But one Harlequin with a sword is better than the whole tank. And I think that's really all there is to say about it. It's worth noting that because it has the vehicle keyword, you can use vehicle shock, right? The standard stratagem that lets you do mortal wounds by charging something with a vehicle. And there's a pretty nice combo here available whereby this thing makes a normal move. Some Harlequins get out of it. They throw a grenade at something. They shoot it with their fusion pistols. And then if you needed to, you could charge with this and vehicle shock something to put the final mortal wounds on it, which is pretty good, actually. Okay, let's take a look at the Troop Master, whom I've already said is really good. He's more expensive than he was in the index rather significantly. He's up to 75 from 55. And he's changed quite a bit. He has the same old stat line he's always had with an 8-inch move, T3, his 4-up invuln, and the 6-up save. 4 wounds, leadership 6+, and 1 OC. Actually, maybe he had 3 wounds before. In any event, he has 4 wounds. And then you can give him either a fusion pistol or a neurodisruptor or a shuriken pistol. You would never give him a shuriken pistol. And the neurodisruptor and the fusion pistol have exactly the same stats as the regular troop version. I'm pretty sure you always give him the fusion pistol. So if he's running around with 5 clowns in a clown car, that's 3 fusion pistols in the unit, which is great. But his fusion pistol hits on a 2-up. And then he has 2 melee weapons, either the Harlequin special weapon or the Troop Master's blade. So you've either have him modeled with a sword or not with a sword. Both of these are excellent. The special weapon is 6 attacks. So this is kind of a twist, right? For him, the special weapon is the more attacks. Hitting on 2s, strength 4, -1 AP, flat 2 damage with devastating wounds, of course. Really good. Massively increases the killiness of a squad into something like Space Marines. If you give him the Troop Master's blade, fewer attacks at 5 instead of 6, also hitting on 2s, but strength 5 instead of 4, -2 AP instead of -1, flat 2 damage, also devastating wounds. I think I'm always going to take the blade for the extra AP and the extra strength. The opportunity to occasionally do a slightly more wound devastation seems like not the trade. But they're both good. It doesn't really matter what you've got them modeled with. They're both good. He has the flip belt, of course, that does the flip belt thing. And then he has 2 abilities. One is Kegrak's Favor. So you remember how Harlequins can choose to either reroll 1s to hit or reroll the wound roll? He can do both, always. He doesn't have the option to be -1 to hit, but of course, if he's running around with a unit of Harlequins and they decide to be -1 to hit, he will. But the other abilities won't stack. And then he has an ability called Choreographer of War, which gives the unit he leads the 6-inch instead of 3-inch pilot in and consolidation. And then also it has this interesting additional addendum. When making a consolidation move or a pylon move, you do not need to end that move closer to the closest enemy model, provided that it ends as close as possible to the closest enemy unit. This allows you to perform fun movement shenanigans, potentially moving models that are already in base-to-base contact around like the back of a unit to get into base-to-base contact with a different model because it puts you on an objective or makes it hard for that unit to escape or just puts you in a more favorable position for when this particular combat ends. That's a really good power in the hands of a player who's familiar with melee movement shenanigans. You can also make it tougher for enemy units who might want to charge the Harlequins to reach them by moving around the back of a unit. There's all sorts of stuff you can do here. But really, the advantage to the Troop Master is twofold. One, he gives you access to a couple of enhancements, which I'll talk about later. And 2, it's just a significant increase to the damage output of the unit. Having either 5 or 6 attacks, probably 5, coming in at flat 2 damage with dev wounds, makes the Harlequins much killer into everything, as does the extra fusion pistol that hits on 2s that can also be fired from the back of a boat. And you do this without substantially increasing the footprint of the unit, because you could be thinking to yourself, but Brent, for 75 points, I could get 5 more Harlequins. You could, and then they wouldn't fit in a boat, and they would be much harder to hide and maneuver. He's good. Okay, let's take a quick look at the other characters. The Death Jester is still 90 points, like in the index. He has a very similar data card, but no longer has access to the cool stratagem that made him a total ass kicker before. But he does have access to enhancement. But he does have access to a new enhancement that potentially makes him a cool ass kicker. Also, he's lone op, and lone op stuff is enormously helpful for objective control and secondary scoring. He moves a T3. 4-up invuln save, 4 wounds, 6-up leadership, 1 OC. So I think same as the Troop Master. This is like the standard Harlequin character. He's running around with a Shrieker cannon with a 24-inch range with 3 attacks, hitting on 2s, strength 6 -2, flat 2. And like before, he has Cruel Amusement. So when you're firing with the Shrieker cannon, you choose to either get Ignores Cover, Precision, or Sustained Hits 3. Usually you want Sustained Hits 3. And I think now is actually a solid time to talk about the enhancement that can only go on the Death Jester. It's called Murderer's Jest. Each time the bearer makes an attack that targets a unit that's below half strength, each successful hit roll scores a critical hit. And that's 20 points, taking him to 110, which is about where he was before with the index enhancement. Now, you probably already see how this works. The advantage here is that he hits on 2s, and if every 2 is a critical hit, then he triggers sustained hits probably three times to hit like 12 times with a weapon that's really good into anything that's less than T12. It does have to be below half strength, but this, as we already established, because Harlequins are a death by 1,000 cuts army, this is a really good way to put the finishing hit on something. I think you always take this if you're running a Harlequin detachment. The question is whether you take extra Death Jesters. And I'm currently of the opinion that I think you don't. There's plenty of other stuff here that's going to give you a lone op equivalent. Speaking of lone operative, the Shadow Seer. The Shadow Seer is really close to being good, and I think it's kind of fine, and I think there is an argument for having one in your list. But it is annoying that it felt like it was unnecessarily in the penalty box during the index, and it feels like it's still there. And I'm not really sure why. It's not like they were ever the terror of the table or something, but it has the standard Harlequin character stat line, so I won't read that to you again. You can give it the Neurodisruptor or the Shuriken pistol. It's the same as it always is. You can't get a fusion pistol. Its melee weapon is a Mist Stave, which has 4 attacks, hitting on 2s, strength 5, -1 AP, D3 damage. It's got the psychic keyword. It's fine. Not a bad little melee weapon. Brings a little bit of extra punch when it's running around with the squad. And it is 15 points cheaper than a Troop Master, and it's bringing that D3 damage, which is nice. It is a bit of a bummer that it no longer has the grenade launcher on its back, no longer does anything. That was kind of fun. I think it could have stood to have some extra slight damage output. I think it used to have a ranged psychic attack, like you could smite stuff with it in earlier editions. But in any event, it has 2 abilities. Treacherous Illusion, which gives melee weapons equipped by models fighting the squad the hazardous keywords. So after they fight, they've got to roll a 1 for each of those weapons, and they might take some mortal wounds, and that's cool, but you're never going to plan around it. You want your Harlequins to be killing the stuff that they're fighting when they attack. If your opponent's hitting you back, hopefully they don't have a lot of models left. It's fine. It's a nice to have. It's not anything to get too excited about. I'm not sure that the inconvenience of having to remember that it exists equates to its value. I will say he's got his other ability, Fog of Dreams. This is the thing that makes a Shadow Seer potentially worth thinking about. He gives the unit that he's leading lone op, so they can't be targeted and shooting outside of 18 inches. He doesn't have it when he's alone, which I find so annoying. If the Shadow Seer just had lone op and also gave it to a unit that he led, at 60 points, as a singleton model running around, he would have a role. He could perform secondaries, help hold primaries, and then be a little bit of late game melee punch. He does have a pretty cool war gear option and enhancement called the Mistweave. It's only 15 points, which makes him the same cost as a troop leader, and that can give the whole unit that he's leading infiltrators. This might actually be worth thinking about doing, because now you can have a Harlequin unit led by like a somewhat weaker Troop Master starting the game in the midfield that is untargetable outside of 18 inches. And so if you get first turn, potentially you can be right on top of your opponent early and just create a problem that your opponent has to deal with while the rest of your Harlequins kind of move into the mid board, because Harlequins are going to probably often be making big turn 2 plays. That's also how they've played in earlier editions, because you don't have a lot of stuff that can authentically alpha strike. They're not fast enough for that. But this would be, especially if you remember that with battle focus, they can move 10 inches before they charge. Or you could just have this unit that's like kind of out of the way, helping you hold objectives at range and perform secondaries until you maybe need them to get some kind of aggressive in the late game. And I think this probably is a tool worth having at a 1-up, especially if you're going mono Harlequins. I think that if you are running craft worlders in your list also, it becomes much harder to justify this because you have plenty of stuff that can alpha strike more easily early, and that's too expensive just to have him for the lone up thing. If he could just be a 60-point foot lone up dude on his own, sure, but not otherwise. Okay, the Solitaire. The Solitaire is really good. The Solitaire works more or less how the Solitaire has always worked. It's 115 points for a lone up anti-infantry melee torpedo that can do secondaries for you, be a deterrent, and then at some point just absolutely murder something. The Solitaire has the standard Harlequin character stat line except with a 12-inch move, and then still has the blitz ability, which allows you once per battle in your movement phase before the model makes a normal move, it can blitz, and if you do, you add 2d6 to the model's move, and you add 3 to the attack characteristics of the weapons. Now, because it also battle focuses, you could actually do 14 inches plus 2d6 move and then charge, and then add 3 to the attacks. It's equipped with Solitaire weapons, which have precision, 9 attacks. So just figure, this is probably a one-off model. Usually it is. 9 actually means 12 because you'll blitz. Hitting on 2s, strength 6, -2, flat 2. And it also has stealth, it's -1 to hit, and it has fights first, which is very important. So it can't be caught flat-footed. The only thing that might theoretically want to charge a Solitaire and endure the fights first is some big like T12 monster. I admit to thinking that the Solitaire weapons could have had dev wounds, given that there's no way to get to those on a 5, and then it would have some play into some tougher stuff, but it's fine. I mean, it's always been an infantry killer. Oh, right. It can also advance and charge, right? This is the one Harlequin that can. So it's just disgustingly fast. So 14 plus 2d6. I'm sorry, 14 plus d6 if it's not blitzing. In the event that it survives an initial blitz to fight again, you can still get it anywhere you need it to go. But you obviously can't combine blitz with an advanced move because blitz is itself a type of move. It's a normal move. You always want to take a Solitaire in a Harlequin list. It's just thematic, and at 115 points, it's totally worth it. So those are the characters. I think you're probably looking at 3 up for the Troop Master, 1 up for the Death Jester with the enhancement, 1 up for the Solitaire. I'm going to probably take a Shadow Seer. Some of you aren't going to. Some people might take 2 Troop Masters, I guess, but I really think it's a 3 up. Okay, that leaves the Void Weaver and the Sky Weavers. Let's take a look at the Void Weaver. It's 125 points. It has the same stat line, 14-inch move, T6, 4 up invuln, 4 up save, so benefits from cover, 6 wounds, OC2. It is the transport, but instead of having transport capacity, it's tripped out for fighting. It has 2 shuriken cannons, and you can either give it the Void Weaver Haywire Cannon, or you can give it a Prismatic Cannon. I think you always give it the Prismatic Cannon like you did before. We know what the shuriken cannons do. They're good. The Prismatic Cannon has a 24-inch range. There's 2 profiles. So there's the Dispersed Pulse, the anti-light infantry, and then there's the Focused Lances. The anti-light infantry one is just 2d6 bolter shots with no AP. So just hitting on 3, strength 4, no AP, 1 damage. You're almost never going to use that one. And then the Focused Lances, only 2 shots, hitting on 3s, strength 12, -3 AP, flat 4 damage is good. But it's definitely going to miss the rerolls that it used to have because two attacks with the Prismatic Cannon is just that's not a lot. And it's nice that it is as strong as a Bright Lance. That's cool. But it's also 30 points more than a Warwalker. So what it's really paying the points for is its polychromatic camouflage. And it's lone up. It can't be targeted outside of 18 inches. This is going to help you with secondary scoring and board control, and it's going to be a little bit of long-range anti-hard target fire that can multi-class into infantry elimination. I currently kind of feel like it's a 2-up. So you have 250 points of just untargetable secondary performative stuff. I like 2 of these better than cheaper Death Jesters running around mostly because it's so fast. I do think it might be ever so slightly overcosted, but I think it's still a really solid tool in this detachment. And something that I think I've mentioned it in some of the other detachment videos. It's something I want to experiment with splashing into my other detachments, just because I think having a really fast, light vehicle with essentially lone op to help with secondaries could be really great. And then lastly, the Sky Weavers, which you either take in 2s at 95 or, in 4s at 190. And I think the central decision, there are not a lot of data sheets, right? So when it comes to Harlequin list building, I think the biggest difference between lists, the biggest thing that people are going to have to make a big choice about is just how many Sky Weavers they're running relative to the number of troops and whether they're 2s or 4s. The Sky Weaver is very similar to what it was before in terms of the stats and the points. It's definitely going to miss the free rerolls to hit and wound on its anti-tank weapons. I'll run you through the stat line. It's a 14-inch move. But battle focus, it can go to 16. It does have the smoke keyword. T4. It's a 4-up save with a 4-up invuln, so again, can benefit from cover. 3 wounds per bike. 6-up leadership, 2-up OC. The bikes can either have a shuriken cannon or a Starweaver haywire cannon. You always take the haywire cannon. It fires 2 shots, hitting on 3s, only strength 3, -1 AP, flat 3 damage, but anti-vehicle 4-up with devastating wounds. So you newer players who don't remember this from before, basically when you roll to wound vehicles, every 4-up you roll to wound does a flat 3 damage to the vehicle, bypassing all armor saves, including invulnerable saves. So a unit of 2 of these is putting out 4 of those shots. A unit of 4 puts out 8. 8 shots, 6 of which are going to hit, and then 3 of which are going to just bypass all armor saves, doing just flat 9 unavoidable damage, is a really powerful tool into durable vehicles. And then you can either give each bike, there's a dude driving, and then there's an elf on the back with either a Zephyr Glaive or a Star Bola. So you can either trip them out for extra shooting or trip them out for good melee. The Star Bola has a 12-inch range, D3 attacks, hitting on 3s, strength 7, which is nice because even stuff that's T12, it wounds on a 5-up, -2 AP, flat 2 damage. That really does significantly increase the shooting damage into hard targets. Versus the Zephyr Glaive, which gives each bike 4 melee attacks, hitting on 3s, strength 6, -2 AP, flat 2. So more attacks in melee, but lower strength, same damage. In squads of 4, I like these with the Star Bolas because I think they bring them past the break point for damage output. So you do an average of 9 damage to a hard target, but then the 4 Star Bolas are going to hit it another, or provide another roughly 8 shots. About 5 or 6 of those hit. You put in another couple wounds, you get through another 2 to 4 damage, and that destroys something that otherwise would have been barely still alive. On the small squads, I really like the glaives for aggressive melee cleanup and to tie something up. The glaives have gotten better than they were in the index for sure. Harlequins do have a lot of ways to kill tough stuff, but so being able to destroy enemy tanks at range is kind of a big deal. There will be matchups in which your opponent just doesn't have any vehicles, which is a reason to not go totally crazy with Skyweavers. But it's worth pointing out that they do still have devastating wounds. You can no longer, unfortunately, push through. It used to be the case that if you came up against an opponent with no vehicles, you could always use Fate dice to push through some devastating wounds on, like, a Keeper of Secrets, which you can no longer do. But in my Harlequin lists, I think I'm definitely going to want 1 unit of 4 Skyweavers with the bolas. Also because you can use Fade back, right? Because they battle focus. They're durable enough to survive a volley of return fire and battle focus. And then I'm thinking probably like 2 units with glaives that are 2-up bikes. That because they're so fast can also give your troops support where they happen to need it on the board. Those glaives are also really good Space Marine killers. Okay, let's take a look at the enhancements and the stratagems. I've already talked about some of the enhancements. And just to note, as I'm commenting on list building and telling you how many of various things I think make sense, I probably shouldn't be doing that. I'm really far into this Codex review. I'm tired. I don't mean to tell you what to do. And no one's an expert yet, right? Like nobody has lots. Even the people who had this in advance to review haven't taken it to a tournament yet. They've only got a few reps in. So like we're all just spitballing here. And the only stuff that I have really strong feelings about are that you do want the Death Jester with the enhancement. You do want 2 or 3 troop masters. You do want I think at least 3 MSU squads and transports. If you're going mono, you do want a Solitaire, and you definitely want some bikes. But like everything else I'm saying about list construction is probably overly editorializing a little bit. Okay, let's get to the good stuff. Let's look at the detachment. I've already given you the detachment rule. I've talked about 2 enhancements, Murderous Jest, which makes Death Jesters better, and Mistweave, which makes Shadow Seers creepy and infiltratey. And then there's 2 others, which I really like. The first is called Kegarak's Coil. You put it on a Troop Master, and each time the Bearer's unit ends a charge move, you select an enemy unit within engagement range of the Bearer's unit, and then roll a d6 for each model in the Bearer's unit that is within engagement range of that enemy. And for every 4-up, it suffers 1 mortal wound to a maximum of 6. I think this is really good. I think you want this. Probably. It is tragically 25 points, which is a lot. But hear me out. If you give it to a troop master who's leading a unit of Harlequins in a transport, you can move the transport near something. They can jump out. They can throw a grenade with the grenade keyword. So you roll 6d6, and on every 4-up, you do a mortal, right? They shoot with their fusion pistols. They charge. Then you roll 6d6 again, and for every 4-up, you do a mortal. And then the transport can charge and use vehicle shock and do a bunch of mortals. And then you have all these melee attacks with dev wounds, and you've got 3 fusion pistols, and you could absolutely annihilate something really big and bad. The other temptation, of course, is to put it on a really big unit of Harlequins that doesn't fit in a transport. So you're rolling like 12 dice, and you'll statistically probably do 6 mortal wounds with it. And if they threw a grenade first, right, on average, they would do 9 mortal wounds to something. But I think that the mobility of the smaller unit and the fact that you would have to get into engagement range with all of those quins, which is 1 inch base-to-base contact, doesn't do it. I think the move probably is to put it on the smaller unit because it can also then potentially jump back into the transport, right? And there's a chance you might actually get to do this a couple of times, which would be awesome. And as I've said before, Harlequins are kind of this like death by 1,000 cuts army, and this in combination with the grenade strat is one of those things that gives you an opportunity to really jack the damage output on a single squad. And I love that it's unpreventable. I love that it goes through invulns. It is CP intensive if you're both throwing the grenade and doing the thing. So that's something to consider. But that's the other thing. When CP is tight, it's actually potentially an alternative to throwing a grenade that basically has the same effect. Okay, and then lastly, Mask of Secrets. You give it to a Harlequin model, and each time an enemy unit within engagement range falls back, the enemy unit has to take a desperate escape test, and it's at -1. And if it's battle shocked, and that's cool. I'm never gonna take this one. It's only 15 points, but it's just too situational. Maybe if I just can't figure out another way to spend that 15 points when I'm done with my list, maybe. But I don't see it happening. Okay, stratagems. The first one is called Staged Death. You use it in any phase, and you use it on a Harlequin characters model from your army that was just destroyed, and at the end of the phase, it just comes back to life. Yep, you heard me right. It just gets back up with half of its starting number of wounds remaining. So it just stands up with 2 wounds. Each character can only do this once per battle, but this makes everybody fugin'. It's better because you don't fail on a 1. It just automatically happens. This is one of those reasons why I think you want like 3 troop masters. Also, the heckin' Solitaire. Heckity heck. You're telling me they have to kill my Solitaire twice? Yes, sign me up. This stratagem, I think, more so maybe than any of the others, makes Harlequins as a mono army like quite viable. Not only is this going to help you with primary objective control, which Eldar struggle with, right? In some respects, Harlequins may play the primaries more easily than craft worlds, even though they're more fragile. Because unless your opponent has a way to wipe out the unit in multiple phases, if you have a unit on an objective led by a character and they shoot it off, the character just stands. There's no, unless they can charge in there, that's your objective. There isn't really anything they can do about it. It also makes it hard to shut down Harlequin momentum. So like if you get into your opponent's backfield with some murdery stuff and you play the trading game, right? Where like your troop, your 5 elf troop with a troop master or even a shadow seer kills something, your opponent kills the unit in turn, but then the character stands back up and puts some damage on something else. That's really good. It's also kind of consistent with the fiction where oftentimes like Imperials think they've killed some Harlequin named character only to discover that they haven't yet again. Fabius Bile at one point wonders if this particular shadow seer that he keeps encountering is even the same elf or whether or not they're just many elves that use the name. I just think this is neat. Okay. So stage death just sucked up 3 or 4 of your CP over the course of the game. Let's look at Hero's Fall. This is just a 50% fight on death thing, right? So use it on any Harlequin unit, and when you're removing units in the fight or models in the fight phase, and on a 4-up, your models get to fight. If they're killed before they fight, they get to fight before they're removed. These 50-50 fight on death things, I tend to be a little bit lukewarm on. I like it with I like the weird synergy with something like staged death, where if a troop got countercharged and you played this, potentially a bunch of them could fight before they die, and then if your character is killed, they could get up. You still could have the character next turn. Like, that's good. But I think I'm often going to struggle to afford this one. There's so much other good stuff, and the real target that you'd want to use it on would be, of course, the Solitaire, but it's never going to come up because the Solitaire fights first. So I guess if the Solitaire charged something that fights first and got killed by the fights firster, there'd be. But would you charge something with the Solitaire that fights first? I don't know that you would. Okay, the next one is called Mocking Flight. You use it in the movement phase just after one of your units falls back, and now it's eligible to both shoot and declare a charge. Great. I've talked about this in there are other detachments that have something like this. Harlequins absolutely need this. They need to not just be bound up in melee. It's really good and also very situational. Okay, Trickster's Retort. This one's really good. In your opponent's movement phase, just after an enemy unit ends a normal, advance, or fall back move, one troop unit from your army that is within 9 inches of the enemy unit can make a normal move of up to 6 inches. There are 3 obvious uses for this. One is you move out of line of sight. Another is you move out of charge distance. The third is if there's not a lot left on the table, potentially you use it to like close. And then there's one less obvious use whereby you use it to get close enough to get back into transport, or you could even sort of chain the movement. So like you move the unit 6, and then when it gets shot, you could fade back with it, right? And maybe one of these moves would let it get into a transport. But this is a great tool in part because it forces your opponent to constantly worry about where you're going to go with your Harlequins when they move around the field. It just puts a mental tax on them. On the other hand, it puts a mental tax on you because you have to think about where your Harlequins can go as your opponent moves around the field and make sure you move the right unit. But part of playing elves is presuming that you're going to be able to out-Farsi your opponent when it comes to stuff like that in most cases. Okay, this next one is called Bloody Dance, and I think it is not immediately obvious how it works, even though it looks like it's immediately obvious how it works. You use it on either a Harlequin's infantry or Harlequin's mounted unit from your army that is within 6 inches of an enemy unit, and would be eligible to declare a charge against one or more of those enemy units if it were your charge phase. Your unit now declares a charge that only targets one or more of those enemy units, and you resolve the charge, but you don't receive the charge bonus, so you don't get fights first. And it's not the same thing as heroic intervention because the opponent doesn't have to like finish a charge. It's just at the end of your opponent's charge phase, even if their unit didn't do anything, you could still declare a charge. So if you move into combat with something of your opponent's that did not charge and does not have fight first, then theoretically you will get to fight first. Or if you do this with like a Solitaire, you get to fight first. Or it's a way of just bringing some backup. So your opponent charges one of your Harlequin units with something that can probably kill it, and you move in with another unit, and now your opponent has to decide, do I split attacks and try to damage both units, and you get to punch them back after they do the thing. Or if you're super tricky, there might be ways to use this to get onto an objective, to clear it out on your opponent's turn and score it on your own. And this is another one of those things where if you have CP, your opponent has to constantly be like, but what about the Bloody Dance? Trickster's Retort and Bloody Dance together should significantly increase the mental load on your opponent. And then the last one, exit the stage. At the end of your opponent's fight phase, one of the Harlequins units from your army that is not with engagement range of one or more enemy units, you remove it from the battlefield and place it into strategic reserve. This is really good. It prevents your Harlequin troops from ending up just like too far outside of what's going on. It allows you to pick up models that you've used to perform secondaries, put them into strategic reserve, and then bring them in on a board edge next turn. I like it on that souped up Death Jester model that is trying to get an angle with its like 9 to 12 sustained hits. I even kind of like it on Void Weavers, who might be trying to really stay away from the opponent to capitalize on their lone op equivalent that in the late game might need to be on the other side of the board for scoring purposes. Or a big unit of bikes, the shooty bikes, right? That want to drop in 9 inches away from something that they're going to hit with all of their things. This should make it possible for you to keep all of your army in the game for pretty much all of the game. These are all good, but I think that staged death is probably going to account for about a third of your CP. I think in the course of a game, you're probably going to throw a couple of grenades. Harlequins are not a big Overwatch army, so you're not burning up CP on that. I think you're looking at using exit the stage at least once, maybe a couple times. And then I think Trickster's Retort and Bloody Dance are going to account for the rest. And I think really sophisticated use of Trickster's Retort and Bloody Dance is going to be one of the differences between solid intermediate Harlequin play and like expert Harlequin play. I think not only will it be fun to play this army when you play it well, but I think it will be enjoyable to, if you like battle reports, watch people play this well. I think that when all of the tools are used to their full capacity, I think it will be elegant to see. And that's neat. From a game design perspective, wow. I like when I read rules that make me want to like buy the rules writers a beer at Warhammer World, just so I can say, I see what you did. That was so clever and cool. But Warhammer World is 3,000 miles away. So I'll just settle for saying admiring things in my YouTube video. Okay, I just want to, before I close it out, because I already talked about list construction as I went, like some sort of overbearing clown daddy who really has no business telling you what you should do with your clowns. I'll just comment on a couple of Craft Worlds units that I think have very good synergy in this list, if you do want to splash them in. The first and most obvious one, and you're going to hate that I'm saying it because I always say it, Lekus and 5 Warp Spiders with the Exarch with the melee build. That's 215 points, and what I really like about it is that it can get right up in your opponent's face on turn 1, because as I said before, there's not a ton of alpha strike in this. And that's a unit that can threaten anything with good target elim, could jump into your opponent's backfield on turn 1, take away something really important, and then potentially use Fade Back if it needs to. And if you were also running the Infiltrating Shadow Seer, it would give you 2 things you could punch your opponent in the face with before they really even get to do anything, and that would help provide some, like a distraction, a tradie distraction while you're getting your other units into position for a big turn 2 play. My number 2 is a couple of units of Shroud Runners, because one of the things Harlequins don't do well is eliminate light infantry at range. Shroud Runners are very efficiently pointed. They have a fabulous shooting profile into light infantry, but also the ability to use the rifle shot to give your other units a bonus against stuff and cover. It helps all of the shuriken cannons that are randomly in a Harlequin army hit a little bit harder. And pretty much everything in the Harlequin build is pretty quick on its feet, so the Shroud Runners can keep up, which is also nice. And then lastly, I like Shadow Weavers because if you do want to control your own backfield, they are relatively inexpensive units that can screen out your backfield and provide infantry elimination at long range. If you had 2 of these things, it would be 150 points. If you spread them out in your backfield, it would give you a big deep strike prevention bubble. They were 50 in the original Codex. Now they're 75. I think that might have been a little aggressive. I feel like maybe 60 to 65 would have been good. Probably 65. But I do think that they fill a niche, right? The backfield screening, Harlequins benefit from that, and then infantry elimination at range again. And there certainly are a lot of other things that would be good, but I think that if you're running Harlequins, you don't want to be using Fire Dragons to eliminate hard targets, really. You could certainly bring a Wave Serpent full of Fire Dragons. They operate very well independently in any detachment. Azerman with 5 Dire Avengers and a Falcon operates very well in any detachment. Doesn't need CP or anything. But I think that the units that I named probably do have special synergy without trotting on the feet of Harlequin units that perform a similar function. You might consider a unit of infiltrators, like some Rangers or potentially Scorpions, to prevent your opponent from being able to perform turn 1 charges with Deep Strikers, because Harlequins don't fight first except for the Solitaire. And you wouldn't want your foot melee units to be caught flat-footed in the backfield. You do have potentially the Shadow Seer that could take the enhancements to be able to do that with a single troop. And one disadvantage that your opponent faces if she does decide to put stuff in the midfield before the game begins is that Harlequins sure do love to charge stuff in the midfield. So if they don't get first turn, potentially that's a double-edged sword. So maybe you only need to really worry about it against an opponent who likes to gamble. Okay. I'll say one more thing about list construction, and then I'll wrap it up. In addition to your souped-up squads running with characters in Star Weavers, Vipers, what am I saying? Having 1 or 2 MSU Harlequin units at 75 points that can just trade, that can be used to bait an opponent and trade. So your opponent moves something into the midfield, you kill it or do a bunch of damage to it with a 75-point unit of Harlequins that can, if shot, battle focused behind something, and you kind of want your opponent to charge with something or have to bring something out in order to target the unit. Having some tradey disposable stuff is pretty important, and that's why I think that having 1 or 2 small units that maybe isn't led by a character, having some MSU bike units, that stuff's going to be important. And as such, at the beginning of the video, I think I said you might consider up to 2 really big units of Harlequins. I do think you can totally legit run 0 big units of Harlequins. I definitely would not run more than 2, and I think 1 might actually be smarter, right? If you can have up to 6 of these things. If you have 3 led by characters or 4, you maybe have 1 big one. That only leaves you room for 1 to 2 disposables. On the other hand, the character revival strat means that any of your squads led by characters could multi-class into that role if they need to, and if you can afford the CP. And if the positioning available to the character after they die and stand back up again is advantageous. Wheels within wheels, mirrors within mirrors. But what a funhouse mirror it is. Okay, that's what I've got. I think Ghosts of the Webway might be the most interesting and balanced version of Harlequins that I have seen in the time that I have been playing 40k. It's no longer a bunch of rules that are pretty interesting, overshadowed by one pretty straightforward hit really hard combo that actually makes the whole sub-faction much simpler than it initially appears in terms of how it does its damage. But it's also not underpowered, and it's a hard balance to strike with Harlequins. They need to feel hard-hitting and terrifying without in any respect being blunt instruments. And I think in the past, often they've either been a little bit too blunt instrument-y or just not a credible enough threat at the end of the day. And I think that this is a masterful balance of the two. And I'm really excited to take it out for a spin, which I will do immediately after I get reps in with the 3 or 4 craft world detachments that I'm going to run first. But I'm already working on Harlequins lists. Okay. If you have your own ideas about how to use Ghosts of the Webway, please leave those in the comments below. If you want to say something cool about how awesome Space Elf clowns are, please do so. If you are a longtime Harlequin player and you wish to demonstrate this by saying something enigmatic and quite possibly prophetic, but also may just be madness, feel free. And if you wish to become a patron and talk clowns more, you can do so by following the link provided in the video description. Thanks so much. Back again soon with at least one more installment.